Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Andrea Petrone has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Andrea.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Andrew.
I'm looking forward to hearing your story today. As we always start in this show, the audience loves to get to know you a bit more. So just tell us a bit about yourself and where your current focus is.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. So, hi, everybody. My name, as you say, is Andrea. I'm originally Italian, but I lived in the UK now for more than 12 years, almost 13 years. And before that, I had the opportunity to live and work all over the globe. So that's where work led me to. And I did such a great corporate career that lasted for more than 20 years. And then, as you do, Andrew, so I'm also an executive and performance coach. I'm working since 2019 with CEOs and top leaders, so primarily leadership teams. And really international, not just UK based. And I'm primarily focused on mindset. So shifting mindset for shifting actions, so shifting then performance. And really trying to find the connection between mindset and results. And that's what most of the people I work with, they are interested in. And that's essentially the work I do. I have also a podcast called the World Class Leader Show, where I interview CEOs and best-selling authors. So pretty much around the topic and the idea and the work that you do.
Lovely. And because I know obviously what we both do, I'm looking forward to hearing about your story, because obviously you've done the deep inner work yourself, because we obviously can't take our clients through that. We've not done that. So I'm looking forward to hearing your story. But before we do that, and it's very normal for all the guests that come on the show, you focus very much, on the professional side, which I respect. But what about personally, when you're not working and you're creating that space for you to be able to recharge? What is it you do outside of work?
So I'm as many in the world, I love sports, and I'm a tennis player. It's more than a player. I'm really a fanatic. So I take racket sports very seriously. So tennis and now paddles. You might find me around London to play at quite good level. That has been really my main passion. Then I love reading books. I'm writing now my first new book, and it's been like, finally is my time to start, bringing forward all my ideas, all my experiences. But really, reading to me is important. It's a part of my own interpretation of self-mastery, and learning constantly has been always my passion. So I can't stop. And then all the other passion, I think, are the more traditional passion that most people normally have. Nothing, I would say, ordinary, but I think it's spending time for myself really is probably my best passion. Not because I don't want to stay with others, but it's finding that time to reconnect with myself, who I am, what's working, what is not working. Am I still aligned with the purpose that I have? Is there something missing? So I spend a lot of time for self-reflection, and I'm sure they will come up in the conversation. But it's been one of the major takeaways or big aha moments in my career.
And you must be delighted that we now have an Italian Wimbledon champion at last.
And I'm definitely delighted that we have an Italian champion. It's more kind of a domination right now, which maybe I'm going too far. But clearly, having number one in the world has never happened to us in Italian. So yeah, riding the momentum.
Absolutely. And we'll see how the women's European teams go as well. So we'll come to that later. But let's start with you and your childhood, because we are informed, obviously, by what happens to us later in our lives in terms of leadership style that we choose by what happens to us in our childhood. So take us way back to what life was like for you back then.
Well, I come from a very traditional family, if you like. Father was, by the way, very senior leadership in a bank. My mother was a teacher. And as you might expect, it was a very average family, 9 to 5, focus on keeping that job for the rest of your life. That's the environment I I grew up. And that didn't really fit with my ambition since I was really, really young kid. So, and that's not a surprise. That's sometimes what actually, you know, young people do, not in terms of rebellion, but when you feel like that's not your environment, you are for something else. I wouldn't say more, something else. I create my own career, study and career that was based on having an international experience, very different than my experience in my childhood. I mean, we didn't really have the opportunity to travel so much all over internationally. That was not at all an option. So I took a very different path than the traditional path that most of people in my family did and take into. And that was I think was my way of saying I'm different. I'm up for something else. And that's maybe looking back has been one of the first sign of the level of ambition I probably had at the time. I think I really needed to live with the reality when I started to grow up that I'm not necessarily a product of my family, not in a good way, in a bad way, but in the fact that I'm different and I want to respect my own ambition. I don't feel like trapped for running somebody else's life. This has been really me. But again, not in a very negative way, but more in terms of, yeah, I have something in mind. I want to achieve it. That's been really my strong purpose to have in life. And then, of course, as I grew up, that level of ambition started to have different colors, different layers, different frames. And now I can see myself. I was onto something at the time that is very different than what I do right now. But I think the common trait is the level of ambition for, and maybe going back to what I said, the self-mastery and going beyond what is ordinary.
Well, that's fascinating because if you think about the environment you grew up in where, your parents weren't operating in that way, was it a reference point that you had outside or role models that you just thought, I want to be more like that and some ambitious, or was it from within? What do you remember about that?
It's such a great question, which I think is a combination of both. By the way, I didn't have a one single role model, but I think I was influenced by the fact that I started to see people around me working, operating abroad. And that was the first time when I really landed my first job. When I landed my first job, I was still working in corporate, but not far from where my family was. But it was a very international company. I was, in the very early days of that work, I realized that the life of these guys, of my colleagues, were happening abroad, outside of their corporate walls, if you like. And I started to see their level of enthusiasm, the story they were talking about, their whole experience as expats. That story to me started to be, oh, that's something that really fits my personality, my ambition. So I think it's a mix of feeling that something was not fully aligned with what I really wanted to be when I was a teenager. But then when I started to work, I realized, well, that is an avenue for something different. And I think as soon as I started work abroad, which again was in the first 9 months of my first job. And by the way, abroad is not like Paris, was West Africa in the middle of an ocean, in the middle of the bush, on the bush where where only mosquitoes and arms pointed to your head most of the time. So not necessarily an easy environment to work in. I realized, well, there is something more and something different. So that really, from that moment, was building a level of awareness about the possibilities that were in front of me. And then started with being serious about having a fast track career. And that's exactly what happened in the following 3-4 years. I had incredible fast track career. I got to a level where I couldn't even think before. And that is a beginning of realization, something else that might come up maybe in a conversation.
Super. And we've definitely come to that. I'm interested also about how supported you felt at this point, because obviously you were doing something very different to the people around you in terms of the family unit in that sense. So how much support did you have to go and live this life that you wanted?
Well, I would say the support from the family was there. So they never said, don't do it, stay here, etc. They were not happy, but that's different. But I feel like always supporting or running or having a life that was different than theirs. And I would say most of the time, when you have reasonable parents, they appreciate it and potentially the career or the future they're son or daughters is a projection of what they missed because they didn't have the opportunity that we have now in the current society, globalized society. So I didn't have that, if you like, mental support. And the other support, there was no any other support than something that I created. So it was really self-made in my interpretation of that. I didn't ask for help. I didn't get any sort of privilege or benefit to do what I did. So it's been really me. I realized that it was not easy to operate in a different environment and I needed to learn quickly, most importantly, different cultures. Because again, despite the jokes, I mean, working in places where the culture is so different than where you are used to live and operating in, it's not an easy take, especially when you are still 25, 28, you're still a young age. So you're not used to operating because one thing is going somewhere for holiday. One thing is working with a very harsh environment, difficult clients, different conditions. I was working oil and gas with a lot of challenges related to operate in safety in current challenging conditions. So not an easy job, not an easy environment. So all of that, if you put all together, it requires something. So I've been able to build and create something for myself in the moment.
And I'm sure this is going to be the case for you as well. But when we're in our 20s, obviously we're driven, you're ambitious, you put yourself into everything. And it's only really with hindsight that we look back and learn, what it is that actually we were doing. So as we reflect now, particularly in that sort of age, maybe to 28 years old or so, what was it, that was serving you well in terms of the way you were at that point and what was getting in the way back then?
Well, definitely the level of curiosity. So I always welcome all the changes that were happening, things that appeared to me every single day with the level of interest and curiosity versus bias that we all have, but that clearly they were on my way. So I really push back any sort of bias. So I welcome the opportunity to explore and to learn something that was not yet in my in my experience, in my wiring, if you like. So that really served me well. And curiosity, also, I think I was always, and I think something that I still do very much in my work. I've been always very interested to meet people, to talk to people, to get related, to understand how people think and live. So to some extent, a sort of anthropologist. If you think from, I'm sure that you also are exposed in work with clients when it comes to changing, to shaping, driving different culture in organizations. Well, it's thinking if you think about it, it's looking at the organization through the same lens. So being an anthropologist, be curious about other people. That's really served me well. That sort of approach with people. And what maybe served me less well, which I think is maybe a few years later, this sense of when you started to relate to yourself as an achiever, and that's what happened to me. And you see every single year a validation of that bias. And you started to get to the point where you say, oh, everything you touch sounds like, you turn it to gold. And that was what it probably was around the 30s. Everything is working here. So, and that level of complacency, I think, has been clearly one of my biggest roadblock after that, because as soon as happens to everybody, the first negative experience, something show up in environment that didn't really serve me well. The idea of, no, I'm winning, I will be always winning. It's not possible that I can fail. So getting an appreciation of how the current conditions, circumstances changing, I was not able to adapt. Well, I really struggled for a while, maybe a long while, to understand the implication of that until something else happened and then changed me. I would, if I look at myself back there, say, gosh, I wouldn't say full of myself, but the level of confidence that didn't serve me well when that was not needed.
Now, this is fascinating because I can relate to this completely. And for those that are listening, I'm sure they can as well. So let's stay in the 20s before we move on to the events you're talking about. And as you were so driven and you were curious and you were ambitious and achieving, how was that relating to the level of personal relationships you had outside of work? What was going on in terms of that sphere of your life?
So something that really happened during that time is I actually met my wife in one of the new international assignments. Just a few days after I was there, I was not supposed to stay more than 20 days. I ended up to stay there. That was in Egypt for 4 years and a half. you see serendipity, how things change in the environment. And then I would say there was a kind of a defining moment, right? And given that she is different nationality, I think was again is an opportunity to learn and understand different people, different perspective. And I think that's that part of living closely with people that's so different than you. It became incredible rich experience for me in terms of how to deal with people. So it's not surprised at the moment, for example, when I operate not only with international clients, but also I operate with clients where there are so many different nationalities in the client system. I can see nuances that not everybody sees because I live them. I live them. And again, if start with the idea as there's nothing wrong here. Everybody has a different perspective about everything because we see the world in a different way. Intellectually, Andrew, we all know that. But the reality is when it comes then to put that in practice, we're still failing to appreciate our differences. And I think that experience on the 20s to me set perfectly the foundation for who I am right now and what I can do when I step into a very diverse environment.
So let's go back to that first setback you were describing and just, in your own words, tell us what happened and how you actually.
Well, look, what essentially happened is I decided to leave that corporate where I was having an amazing career, primarily due to personal reason. I started to lose interest to travel all over the world every year or two. But when you started to grow, you started to think about building a family and having much more stability in your life. And then I said, look, I think it's a time for me to move out from that career and the environment. And I joined another company and it was risky decision because it was smaller, was international, but not to the level, and stepping from the big to a medium or small, it always comes with risk. And I knew the risk, but the reality that I faced when I was then in a new job, it was probably harder to accept than what I thought in the first place. So that experience was okay, but it's not was like winning before. And then after 4 years, I moved to another company. And then from big, medium, I ended up to make this very wrong decision to work with an entrepreneurial family business, even smaller. And that's when I realized, oh gosh, what am I doing here? It's not me. Struggle to adapt to a condition that was so different. So I feel like I started to relate with this experience as failing experience. And I started to feel like, okay, that's not the career I had even 5 years before. It's not growing as I want to. It sounds like I started to departure from where I really wanted to become. And that was another defining moment of my life. And again, I think what I was missing at the time, Andrew, I struggled to understand why that was happening. I wasn't able to connect the dots between who I was in terms of my own identity and what was the product of the identity into the real world. So at that time, I think I started to push back a lot, meaning blaming, pointing fingers, say it's them, they don't see what I can do, etc., etc., etc. So I wasn't taking responsibility of that. That's, I think, the challenge I had at the time until something shifted. And that shifted for me was taking the vulnerability to say, no, I'm not going anywhere here. Actually, I'm going backwards. But it's a time for me to look at myself in the mirror and start to have some questions. But that question on my own were difficult to have and to respond. So then when I decided to hire a coach, that was my first time experience having a coach. And until then, I even not even consider the idea, which I think it relates with a lot of people maybe in your audience, hiring or not hiring a coach. Because at the time I was seeing having a coach more like a failure, like fixing, like something is wrong. But then I said, no, it shouldn't be that way. So I embraced the experience in a different way. And then finally I realized that it was all about me. How I thought, how I show up, how I was acting, I was talking. So we look at as we do as coaches, we look at the holistic view about me. And we ended up to do a lot of work on our own identity, on my own identity. And I would say that was a defining moment because when I started to realize there was something different in terms of my way of thinking, that was possible, and even the action that were correlated to it, well, that started, if you like, my new career 2.0 and took me where I am right now. So I would say very impactful.
Super. And how many years ago was that, Andrea?
Well, that was back in 2011. So we're talking about 14 years ago now.
Yeah. Great. And it's a really great example. And I had never been coached until 2017. And again, I didn't really know what it was. Like you, I thought it was a failure or what's wrong with me. But somebody said to me, you would really benefit from just going to see a coach. I trusted that person and I went. And then I had some therapy after that as well, which I didn't want to do, but it was really good for me.
Okay.
So what would you say to people out there that are listening to this that maybe are in there, these are never really contemplated having a reset? What is it that they should be thinking about if they're not particularly feeling fulfilled?
Yeah, I think I have a very, very, very practical suggestion, Andrew. Something that I built as a practice for myself after that moment. And it's something that I've been doing since 2011, is taking 2 weeks of my time, of my life, really, every year. And then now it happens in a very specific period of the year when I disconnect totally with everything. With everything meaning sometimes even at personal level, I'm a little bit disconnected with our family, but because I need to reconnect with myself until I feel totally connected from my head to my feet, I will never conclude that is completed. So I need to go through that process for myself. And I know how to trigger that sort of reflection. But to me, that is the best possible way. Whether you want to hire a coach on top of it, if you need somebody else to help you, that is your choice, of course. I suggest doing it at least in the first time because that might give you a different way of thinking and reflecting on it. Now, I think I had it before. I'm a coach. I think I know how to create that space for myself and really spending 2 weeks' time and really reconnect with why you're here, really, why you're here and what you're really looking for. Are you connected to that? Is that clear enough? And once you're clear, what are you really committed to in this life? What you stand for? What you're committed to? What kind of big desired future or desired state you want to create it for yourself? That time spent on 3 or 4 questions like this, I guarantee you, these are the most profound question you can ask to yourself. And if you're able then to find an answer, which you will be at the time of the process, if you are not in a hurry, if you don't feel like the pressure, the urgency to get to an answer, to put a plan, after that, you will have all the answers you need. And that helped me a few times in my career, Andrew. So it's not just in 2011, but then it happened again other 2 times in my life. And if you want, I can talk you more about this. But there are 2 other defining moments across the last 14 years where I did exactly that. And one landed to an important career choice. The other one landed in becoming an entrepreneur, which what I started to do in 2019, started my practice. And now it started again. That is the next step, the evolution of the work that I do. So to me, it's a rolling process because it's not just becoming comfortable with the process. Once you understand the value you can get out of it, and given an environment where we are right now, which I consider frenzy at every level, either that you see at the client, I see every day with my client, but also in an environment that we step every single day. We're all so busy in everything. We're really spending time to have that sort of deep reflection.
Love that. Thank you. And yes, I do want you to take me through those 2 inflection points because I think what's really important here, what you're talking about with the 2 weeks disconnect, is almost getting to this place where we can regenerate the next version of ourselves. I always like to think the Doctor Who for those people that are out there, but we're sitting back and we're thinking, well, who do we want to be? How do we want our lives to be? How do we want to design our life? And having that space. So yeah, please share with us those other 2 reflection points and what they're there.
Well, one is 2018, really. That is the end of 2018. I was now, what I did not say, because we can walk through all the career experience, but from 2013 to 2018, and that's why I moved to London. I decided to join a consulting company and I had a managing partner role, very high level. That was great. I can say there was a fail. Actually was an example of the 2.0 career success I created. New profile, new story. Great. So that reflection was not in service of I'm failing again in my own reframing. Was more about, am I happy with what I'm doing? And I wasn't. And I wasn't for a number of reasons that I will not bore your audience. But it's important to reflect that I was committed to intervene, not letting things go. And I intervened and I spent these 2 weeks. And I remember the first week, I would say for the first 4 days at least, I wasn't getting anywhere. I was asking myself questions in so many different ways to try to get a different answer. But really, it was like I was going around, going around. Then, as always happened in coaching, I was coaching myself, if you like. One single thing came up in my mind, one thing, and that thing changed the entire story of myself, of my entire story from 2018. And that thing is, given I wasn't able to connect all the dots and getting an answer, because that's exactly what we do. We start to thinking and answer your own question, start to say, okay, how that connects to that. I was trying to find that connection point and I wasn't able to find it. But then, you guess what? I look at way, way more back in my life, going back to when I was a teenager. Then I realized there was a connection point. It was something I used to do at that time. It was actually coaching sport team. It was one of the biggest passion of mine. I say, okay, that's something there, because I was trying to understand what really passionate, what I'm passionate about, what I missed during the last 20 years, etc. But was also very mindful of not confusing passion to an opportunity from a business standpoint, because the reflection was more in terms of my career. But then I realized that's the thing about coaching. Then I was great speaking in front of students and people. That happened a few years later. Then I've been always good with my team to coach them to become extraordinary. It was in front of me, as always happened, but I wasn't able to connect all the dots. I created a connection, said, oh, it sounds like that is executive coaching. And then, of course, when you start to get your insight, then you start to see and connect the other dots, whether connected totally or not, that is a different story. By creating a new narrative. I really create a new narrative for myself. And you might not imagine, maybe the same experience that you went through. 1 week later, that was actually Christmas. On the 2nd of January, I enrolled in an executive coaching certification program in Florida. That was on the 2nd of January. My reflection time ended on 27th of December, with Christmas included. Of course, I took the pause to stay with family on Christmas. Just want to say that. But really, I wanted to stay a little bit more longer. Then 2nd of January, I enrolled in the program. I started the program 1 week later. End of March, I was already certified. In April, I had already my large corporate clients. So I guess that was quite impactful. So that was a defining moment.
And what I'm really interested in here, Andrea, which I'm sure the audience is, and we do get this a lot on the podcast, is I know there's been a transition for you because you went large, medium, small, yes, and then ended up setting your own business up. So just talk about that final transition, 2019, because there are people out there that will be thinking about, well, should I run my own business? Should I follow my passion and make some money out of it and feel happy? So just talk to us about that transition. Even though you decided to do it, what were some of the challenges in particular the first 6-12 months?
After the transition. So when I started to work as well, I think there are traditional challenges of living a secure and well-paid work to start your entrepreneurial journey. So I think that is very consistent with many people. They are starting their thing for the first time. So clearly that is the main challenge. But really, to me, the main challenge was, despite there was a desire of mine, was the reality is, do I really want to do? Am I really committed to that? Or is one of those things that you like it, maybe you love it, but at some point you will regret it? Because there was a kind of a change. So it was not really a small change. I've been supported by my wife. That really helped me a lot in that period of time. And she knew the implication of that transition in my life. And then really the other thing was more in terms of getting traction. So that's more business related challenges of getting traction enough to say, okay, I'm onto something that is working, that is happening. But until that time, and again, I was quite lucky to get first clients quite soon. But still, I was living in, am I doing the right thing here? Am I so stupid that nothing is happening? Or so all the if you like, this conversation that you have with yourself. There was plenty of that in the first 6 months.
Super. And I've got a couple of questions left for you. The first one is, let's talk about the future. You're obviously now 6 years into this business. What is it that you want to leave behind? What's the legacy that you're trying to?
Well, legacy is a word that really is close to heart. That's what I speak about. That's what I consider myself in the business of. So I'm in the business of legacy. So I'm interested to work with CEOs that really want to create something extraordinary, something that goes beyond the P&L, something that goes beyond even the purpose, something that's a legacy for the future organization. That's what I'm interested in. So my future is working much more closely to these leaders. And again, at the moment, I can see the CEOs are the first area of that. And I've been always working with CEOs. CEOs are interested to make something like that. That's what I'm really interested in. And in service of that, and that is my evolution, is I create enough traction and I would say recognition now and visibility in the global world for the work I do. And I want to bring it to the next level. So my next plan is I'm creating new hub for CEOs, so where they can really spend time together in a different shape or form. And that is from just digital connection to face-to-face critical impactful events to learn from each other, to get insights. And that is called WCL 2021. That is the hub that I'm creating. So I'm very excited because that will be something that he will create really a forum for that level of legacy.
Thank you. And in terms of the stage you're at in your life now, and I know I can relate to this, we get to a certain level where we peel back the layer of the onion and we discover something else. So what is it that you've discovered recently, in the last month or two, about yourself, which you now realize that you need to work?
Well, for me, I think I've been so rigorous in announcing, declaring my own gaps in when something is missing to get where I want to. So I'm rigorous in that sort of reflection, meaning I'm stay positive, looking what working, but always looking for what is missing at the moment to get there. So I'm questioning myself all the time. And at the moment, maybe my main gap is trying to deal with the level of sense of urgency that I always had. And then the reality that things needs time to develop, especially if you have a big dreams. As I always say, the bigger ambition, the bigger the gap. And the bigger the gap is, the more time that you need to fill that gap. And we need to be realistic with that. Although, despite sometimes I think we are so much either excited by a new opportunity and we see things because we see so clearly in front of us and that is a compelling, then we feel like we need to rush and do things. To me, it's finding the right balance between accepting the reality that to create something extraordinary, you have to have the sense of urgency to make it happen, but also you have to contend with the reality that it takes time and you need to accept that.
And Andrea, if people are listening to this or watching this and they want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that?
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I think the easiest thing would be probably LinkedIn, where we are connected, Andrew. I mean, I'm a quite big influencer creator. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I love the platform. I love sharing. So that's probably the best place to go. And then, of course, otherwise, you can contact me on my email, andrea@andreapetrone.com, or if you like being inspired by leaders, so listen also not just to Andrew's podcast, but my podcast called The World Class Leader Show.
That, Andrea, what I've loved about today is this understanding early on about you wanting to be different in terms of from that family situation, which you obviously loved and appreciated, but there was something more for you. And then these different elements of you reconnecting with who you wanted to be during the next sort of 5-10 years of your life and still doing that now. So I've really appreciated your time today. It's been really interesting to get to know you, and thanks for being on the show.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. Such a wonderful question. So very deep. It doesn't always happen on podcasts. So kudos to you. Well done. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.